America, my name is Osei-Frimpong, and it's not obvious to me that there's a difference between organized Jewry and Pan-Africanism. Now, I will be honest, I am not a huge fan of Pan-Africanism, but I'm going to try to give you a few different takes that might actually resuscitate Pan-Africanism and rehabilitate organized Jewry, and tell you what all these mean and the differences between them. I think I can do this in about 10, 15 minutes. All right. So let's just go about why I'm not a huge fan of Pan-Africanism. The idea that all black people are connected and we should all fight for each other, with each other, and because we are one people. Well, and there's a way in which that makes sense insofar as there's a legitimate way in which that makes sense insofar as the black identity is itself an artifact of colonialism. Before black people were black, they were, different tribes among black, right? So Africans don't think of themselves as black. They think of themselves as whatever tribe they're from. And that has the different particular characteristics different from another tribe and different cultural path determinant lineages go from one set of ancestors to another, and the culture that came through those path determinant choices of a given set of ancestors. They're not different. They're not all just because they happen to be black, right? So the idea that blackness is itself an identity that was imposed prior to colonialism is, I think, problematic. But I do want to say that Pan-Africanism can be defended as a strategy to get reparations for black people in certain states, right? The idea that as a Pan-Africanist, you are advocating for people in certain states to get their justice. And you believe that there is an affinity insofar as those black people in Britain were oppressed by the British government, so the British government needs to make them whole. If other black people somewhere else want to say that black Americans were oppressed as Americans, so the American government needs to make them whole, that would be, I think, probably a good thing. That would be a good thing, but you're moving for a status solution. You're moving for a status solution. And what you're not trying to do is say that, like, some other state should make black people whole. A status solution says, like, no, the state that black people are in should be made whole. If you're talking about transnational agreements, things get a little bit complicated, right? So I think black Americans are American first, and they should be American first because they were some of the first Americans. And what that means is that the United States needs to make black Americans whole from the lineage harm that was done by America, not just sanctioned by America, but installed in and through America. So that, any help in that, I would appreciate. Now, when we talk about organized Jewry, let's talk about what it is to be an organization. If you don't know, to be an organization is to have differentiated parts that all function in a certain way, that function together to sustain the whole. My heart isn't a heart when you abstract it from my body. You cut off my hand, it stops being a hand, although the hand isn't an organ. My skin, if you suck off my skin, it stops being skin, because part of what it is to be skin is to function with everything else in my body in a way that sustains my body. So an organ is differentiated parts that all work together, to sustain the whole, to sustain the living thing that is, right? And we're talking about living things because organs aren't really dead, because we're talking about activity. So it's activity of the thing that works with activity of a different thing that sustains the whole. That is what an organism is. Differentiated parts functioning in different, but in a way that sustain each other and the whole thing. So when you talk about something like organized Jewry, you're talking about not just like, we're vaguely powerful. No, there's a set in media that does what media does. And then there's a set in finance that does what finance does, and a set in medicine that does what medicine does. And at the Wolf Whistle or whatever, they will all come together in something like the World Jewish Conference or the Conference of Jewish Republicans or something like that, and then decide how to sustain themselves possibly by being parasites on whatever nation states they're from. And I think that nation states are actually very important because they are an institution of freedom that organize all of the other institutions of freedom internal to those nation states. Now, Aristotle says that the state, at the level of the state, determines everything that happens in the city, everything that happens within the politeia. I think that's both true and misleading, right? So we have the kind of families we have in the United States because those are the kind of families that the United States allows. We don't allow some forms of polygamy or bigamy. We don't allow some forms of incest that might be popular other places. We stigmatize some things and we uphold other things. And that's something we can do as a people, as a state, and that differentiates us from other states. And I like being differentiated from other states because that means that I can be realized in the public realm, that the state has jurisdiction over. So states are institutions of freedom, and I'm very suspicious of institutions that undermine states as institutions of freedom. So this idea that other people will be here, amass lots of power in the United States, but then use that power for something that might undermine the United States interests, which is different from advocating for justice for black people in the United States, because that's using someone else using state power for people in this state to get what they're due as members of this state. Right? It's not like trying to uphold an apartheid regime or something else. It's actually advocating for like a self-determination of people within the state. I think that's an important difference. Between Pan-Africanism and how Pan-Africanism is appropriate when we're trying to get support for reparations for black Americans from the United States versus organized Jewry trying to get guns for Jews in Israel for the sake of, genociding Palestinians. Right? So we're trying to advocate for self-determination of the people in the state, not trying to sustain an apartheid regime. I think that's an important difference. But also, we have to have arguments for people who think that organized Jewry is just what Pan-Africanism would be like if the Pan-Africans had a Haggadah, had an organizing principle and a little bit stronger internal ethic and a spiritual connection internally to the identity that allowed it to be what it is. Instead, what it is to be black is to be born a certain way. What it is to be black is to be born a certain way, and insofar as the struggle is similar, it's because of the external circumstances that have been imposed on being born a certain way. It's not an internal belief in a radical particularity. The goal of black Americans is to be made whole Americans. And maybe make an America that remembers what it took to be made whole America, to make America black. Or to make America recognize what it means to be American as, this black struggle, right? So that is why I am for states in general. I think they're institutions of freedom. I think black people need to understand themselves as black Americans first. And insofar as it's a strategy to get justice as black Americans, we can go to Pan-Africanism, but understand that as an ideology that my brothers and sisters, and I say this as a guy whose dad was actually from Ghana, I think citizenship matters and the nationhood matters. And so it should be a strategy to get justice in the nation, not pledge some allegiance to some brotherhood that, is a foreign nation, right? So let me look at chat really quick. And we'll find out what the people think of the differences between Pan-Africanism, which I think a lot of people think when they think of Pan-Africanism, they just think of what organized, it's a failed form of organized Jewry. So if Pan-Africanists had their stuff together, it would be more like the Jews. I don't think that, because I have a problem with like a stateless existence. we can be co-black people and Jews can be co-religionists, but this idea that you have an affinity to black people worldwide that should determine how you function in your citizenship, I think is dubious for a variety of reasons. And I hope you agree with me. Like I said, I'm going to try to look at chat right now to see what's going on there. But I think this has been a pretty substantive argument. I hope you understand. All right, let me read chat. What do we have here? Okay, now leave Pan-Africanism in the grave. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Pan-Africanism. I think it's an external identity. It's imposed externally. We are black because we are all oppressed similarly in a way that rhymes, not exactly the same, but in a way that rhymes by the whites. But someone asks, it's not an internal identity. So someone asks, what acts of Burkean thought do you disagree with? All right, so Burkean is a kind of a famous conservative intellectual and former big mucky muck of England. And I think the most compelling aspect of Burkean philosophy is kind of his humanism, insofar as we don't really know why the things we do work. We don't really know why the traditions we do work, but we know that they do work, so don't mess around with them. Don't investigate. Don't expect them to make sense. We don't really know why they work, but they work, and we're awesome, so don't mess with them and go with them. That is Burke. But I actually think that Burke can be, like a lot of our traditions, the ones that do work and make sense, can actually be justified in ways other than they just happen to be traditions that work. They can be justified by thought alone. And I've done all of, I've done all of these things. I've done all of these things. I've talked about this in other videos, mostly the ones on Hegel, and that thought actually has content, and we can get a lot of what it means to be a person out of thought alone. All right, and what the conditions it means to be self-determining as a person and to think is free from thought alone. We don't need to rely on tradition for tradition's sake. We can justify everything, even onto like marriage and market-based civil society and political states through kind of thought alone and thinking about the conditions of thought for anything to make sense. I like the idea that for anything to make sense, marriage has to make sense. It's not obvious that it's the case, and it's pretty late in the argument. You have to get through what nature is and then on how that negates itself in the human. But yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, so someone says, Joshua and Andre says, do you think that American first ideology means we have to be supportive of American imperialism abroad? No, actually. It means that we should support America as a state working with other states, right? I think the foreign adventures actually turns America into an empire that turns the U.S. into Rome, which is one of those reasons why I'm for borders, and I want other people to have borders, and I want other people to have very functioning states that are over there, and so we can have functioning states that are in our way functioning here. So they can do their thing the way they want, and we can do our thing the way we want because we have borders keeping our thing from their thing. And I think that that's appropriate, as long as their thing is self-determining and our thing is self-determining. And even if that we take a hit for our quality of life for the sake of sovereignty and their sovereignty, that would be worth sovereignty. All right? Patrick playing piano says, hypothetical, Ghana became richer than the U.S. Would you be for Ghana paying African Americans reparations? Why would Ghana become richer than the U.S.? It depends on why. I think we need to work on America paying American reparations. We're the ones who print money. And we degraded black people for the sake of other Americans. So this is an internal problem that we can solve internally. Great conversation. Like, share, and donate. I think so too. I don't think anyone's putting the title organized Jewry in their bio. So we'll see how long this this stays up. But I do think, I think I'm right. And I think it's important just to talk about what an organization is. An organization is differentiated parts all working together in a way that functions to sustain the whole and each other as differentiated parts. All right, so I suspect you are more on board with tradition than is respectable. I don't justify the practices because they're tradition. I think a lot of traditional things happen to be able to be legitimized other ways. For example, I think America is legitimate as a project in self-determination, but not for all of the reasons all the differentiated founders laid out. I don't think it's because we need to be so anti-Catholic as some of the people in the northeast were, or because we want to make sure that King George doesn't free our slaves as the people in the South were. I actually think that accidentally we landed on a model of self-determination that can be actually sustained and improved upon in a reasonable and appropriate way. But the way it historically came about as tradition and what it happens, how it can be legitimized are two different things. That's the same for marriage. I think the nuclear family, for reasons I discussed before, as an emancipation from both clan governance and government control and church control, the nuclear family is actually a legitimate, a legitimized expression of freedom. But even if it didn't emerge that way, it could have emerged for all of these other dicey reasons. So what someone says, can you say self-determined reparations? Yes, insofar as America is an institution of self-determination. We work through the political and social processes, and we determine that we need to make black people whole for the damage that we've done to their line. Not just to individual black people in the past, but their line. And I'm not just talking about the lost wages or whatever. I'm talking about the family culture, the degradation, the cultural degradation, right? So Joshua Andre says, I had a debate with my sister about the efficacy of marriage in 21st century. I agree that it's good for building wealth generationally. Do you believe that marriage still has good use now? I think the wealth argument is a poor one. I think the wealth argument is a poor one. I think the kids argument and the family argument is a better one, right? So marriage is good because it's a special way of being with someone and with a group of people that you can't be with in civil society. You can be with, it's a special way of self-determination that's kind of crude in this co-determination, but you have someone who's there with you for richer, for poor. It's not a strategy for money. It's a way of being. It's a way of being able to express yourself, knowing that you can be with someone and who will create a world for you that will interact with you, but is still not alienated from you. Right? So, and it also serves as a unified ethical center for your kids. So you get particular kids and not just a mess of kids. In order to be anything, you have to be a particular something. And if you have two different households with two different particularities, that means you're nothing. So go ahead and be an Orthodox Jew. Go ahead and be a Orthodox Catholic. Go ahead and be an Orthodox LDS. But when you try to mix all these things together, you end up, or have one parent who's serious about all of them, you end up with a nothing. You don't want a nothing. You want unified households with their particularities. In the same way you want unified states that are particular. You want to be an American that's distinct from Canadian. I'm not such a fan of dual citizenship now. I think that you need to be where you are and fight where you're at. All right? Someone says, I made the kids argument as well, drawing a lot of your ideas, actually. Thank you. I think I'm right. No fault divorce is a form of child abuse. It fractures the kid's psyche. It's psychological damage. You have irreconcilable differences with your spouse, but 50-50 custody, as if that metaphysically makes sense. And so you end up with kids who are just a kind of a disaster. They have to reconcile the differences the parents are too cowardly to address. All right. What is your response to people who value individualism for its own sake? All right. So individualism is a pretty late function. Right? You need so many cultural conditions to account for individualism. Nothing in your life is individual in any point in your life, but it's especially true when you're younger. Right? You grow up like every individual, every aspect of your individuality when you're a child is not self-sufficient. It's sufficient on a family. It's sufficient on like other people who love you and who are taking care of you and deciding what taking care of you looks like. So you're not an individual there. Then you can say, well, I'm mature individuality. Well, when you're a mature adult and you're an agent in your life, you've achieved a kind of individuality, but it's an individuality. You're an individual American. You're an individual Georgian. You're an individual member of this family. You're an individual career person where you have a boss. Like no part of your individuality is still in context that determines and shapes what kind of individual you are. There are no abstract individuals. There are only relative individuals where that aspect of individuality can interact with the determined aspect in a way that calls them individuals, as opposed to people who are obviously and overly determined by, family or jobs or anything like that. All right, so no one is an abstract individual. No one is even a spiritual individual. It takes a lot of cultural baggage and time and history to achieve the individual, like our notion of individuality. And a lot of people who consider themselves abstract individuals are surprised when no one comes to their funeral. Surprised when they can't do anything meaningful, because to do something meaningful means to act in context. And so, I don't know, you're trying, right? So what would you say that the decline of black civil society and autonomous community organizations since the pre-civil rights era can be attributed to the breakdown of the black family? Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, so civil society is the market-based institutions through which we produce and consume goods and services from each other. And we need, that is premised on strong families. So there's this idea that there's a village abstracted from family and that the village will do all these things. But actually, the village is just networked families. And without networked families, you don't have, you just have a lot of network debt and liabilities and people adding liabilities on to each other. So yeah, without a black family, we're not going anywhere. But what we need to resuscitate the black family is a quality of reparations that gets us the ability to organize, to tell people the importance of the black family, right? Because right now, the people who control the black mind do not have black people in mind, or the self-determination of black people in mind. They control black people, the black mind, for their own interests. It's either market society that wants black people to buy stuff, and it's easy to buy stuff you shouldn't buy if you don't have family members saying that maybe you shouldn't buy that. Or it's organizations that just prey on black labor and black vulnerability, like parasites. Or, there are a lot of feminist organizations that want to break up the black family just because it gives white women relative power over their family, but it completely destroys black family, and they're okay to sacrifice the utter destruction for black family of the black family for relative control over their white ones. All right, someone says, thanks for recommending Sport of the Gods. Great book, and it got me feeling down. It is a fantastic book. Paul Laurence Dunbar. He did another one about a preacher that was pretty good. I can't remember the title right now. But yeah, Sport of the Gods, I think, is a wonderful little book. Written in early 19th century. No, early 1900s, like 1903, 1905. But it reads like something that could be written today. First of all, he's a good writer. Second of all, it's just we're still having the trouble of trying to find a black family that makes sense in a world that hates black families. So read Sport of the Gods by Paul Laurence Dunbar. And also, if you appreciate what I'm doing, which I think you should, in these times of woe and want, go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50 a month, and I'll keep doing it. I don't know how long this video is going to stay up, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to log off. I'm going to download this video because, for reasons. So, I just think that maybe I might get a strike or banned or something like that for suggesting that there's such a thing as organized Jewry, when there are entire conferences where wealthy Jews from all over the world will come together and decide what the next move is. right? So another difference between organized Jewry and Pan-Africanism is that there's a Haggadah, right? There's a story that tells Jews who they are, what they are, and what it means to be who they are and what they are, and a time for answering questions. There's an entire political internal process that's been like disseminated in households for every Seder, and then like kind of moves up, and it kind of ties it together in the way that we don't have. There's no Pan-African Haggadah. There's no Black Haggadah. The closest was the NOI story, which I think is actually good for orienting some Black people, but there's no organizing principle. There's no spiritual unity. There's an externally imposed unity that's held together by phenotype, but no spiritual unity that's worked out through our minds about what it is to be Black. But I did teach my kids bid whist, so I am trying to do something for the culture. Technology, I think, is good. I think every Black person should know what technology is. like I think there's something to be said for the NOI in terms of maybe not the bean pies, but the storytelling and the understanding of purpose. What are my thoughts on FD Signifier and him calling you out for your Nick Fuentes take? Hey, look, FD Signifier is a talented man. I don't think anyone's going to get better for listening to him, but he's entertaining. I think he's a liberal. Do I see him as more helpful or hurtful? I see him as very popular in a way that's irrelevant. Like I said, he doesn't change anyone's mind on anything. He might make it harder to do Black male studies and because he's a feminist and I'm not, but it's popular to be feminist. He's everyone's favorite Black man. He's like the Cosby of this generation. And was Cosby a net positive or net negative for Black people? I don't know. I think it was ultimately confusing, but I think he's a guy. I wouldn't mind talking to him maybe off camera and just how much of it is a character, how much is sincere. He puts in his time. He does the work. He deserves to eat too. So I think he's an entertainer. I don't watch his videos because, like I said, I don't think they actually raise consciousness in the way that I try to do. I'm trying to make sure that you marry someone who doesn't divorce you. I'm trying to make sure you don't screw up your kids or your line. I'm actually trying to give you arguments. I don't really know if he's doing that in the same way, but yeah, I'll get to voting Democrat. So the best thing he could do right now is have a revolution and change, and then take his audience with him, right? So I get punished because I've I figured out a lot of things before. Now, as he gets more radical, he might be able to take his audience with him. I don't know. That would be useful. But right now, he's just where he is, and I don't think that's particularly useful. All right, so I hope you appreciate the work I'm doing, or the risk I'm doing by writing the words I'm doing and saying what I'm saying. And you go to www.funkyacademic.com, kick in $5, $15, or $50 a month. Share this with your friends, and happy Thanksgiving. Peace.